It's time for us to once again talk about former Harvard professor Francesca Gino. And the reason is because the folks at Data Colada have recently released a blog post claiming that they have proof that Gino manipulated her work in exactly the way that they suspected, thanks to the now public Harvard internal report. If you don't know what I'm talking about, or you don't remember the context for this, let me give you a very high-level overview. Francesca Gino was a top professor at Harvard University. She was a professor of behavioral science, which is also my specialty. She was accused of faking her data in 4 different studies by these 3 guys who run a blog called Data Colada. Data Colada brought these suspicions to Harvard University, who then ran their own internal investigation. And as you can see on this Ground News headline, the Harvard Business School investigation report recommended firing Francesca Gino. They found that yes, Francesca Gino had indeed manipulated her data and recommended firing her as a result. Now, when I look at this story on Ground News, I can see the biased distribution when it comes to the type of media outlets that are reporting on this story. And as you can see, this story was far better covered by right-leaning media compared to left-leaning media, which I think makes sense, as people on the right of the political spectrum tend to dislike Harvard University as an institution, and so this story seems to fit in with that narrative, so it makes sense why right-leaning publications would want to talk about this story more. Another thing that I can do on Ground News with this story is compare headlines between right-leaning and left-leaning publications. For example, if I look at this right-leaning publication, the Western Journal, it says, Harvard star honesty researcher busted in probe, investigators recommend termination. But if I compare that to a left-leaning media source like Vox Media, you can see that they took a much softer, less definitive tone. It says, a Harvard dishonesty researcher was accused of fraud. Her defense is troubling. So I love to be able to compare different headlines like this on the same story so that I can come to my own most informed conclusion. Very quickly, let me talk about a couple other features that I love about Ground News before we continue talking about Francesca Gino. One is that Ground News lets me follow topics that I'm interested in, for example, science or Harvard University, so that I can keep up to date with the news that's most relevant to that. And Ground News also lets me change my location so that I can switch between the US edition, the UK edition, the Europe edition, Canada edition, or the international edition, depending on where I am in the world, so that I can get the news that is most relevant to me. And as if that wasn't enough, Ground News is also completely ad-free, as it's funded by subscribers like you and me. So it's really great to be able to read the news without 1,000 annoying ads popping up while you're trying to do so. So if you're interested in being more informed and trying out Ground News for yourself, then be sure to use my link in the description, ground.news/Pete, and you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is the plan that gives you access to all the features I just talked about. You can either use my link in the description, or you can use the QR code that is on screen right now. Thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Let's carry on talking about Francesca Gino. So after the Harvard investigation recommended firing Francesca Gino, that is pretty much exactly what the dean of Harvard University, this guy, Dean Data, did. He put her on administrative leave without pay. After this happens, Data Colada released 4 different blog posts, each one pertaining to a different study which they have evidence of fraud in. These 4 blog posts go crazy viral. News outlets all over the world are reporting on it, and as a result, Francesca Gino decides to sue both Data Colada and Harvard University for defamation. And as many of you will know, this was for a headline-grabbing $25 million. Now, when this story first broke, before the lawsuit even happened, I released a video covering the first 3 blog posts by Data Colada. And that video has since gone crazy viral. In fact, there's nearly 2 million views on that video. But I never went into the 4th study, the 4th blog post. So now I think is the time to cover that 4th study, because now Data Colada have released a new blog post about that 4th study, claiming that their suspicions about that 4th study are confirmed by the now public Harvard internal report. So let's talk about it. What was the study? What are the accusations? How does the Harvard report compare to the initial accusations? And you guys can let me know what you think about it at the end. Is this it? Is this the final proof that we need that Gino is guilty? You'll let me know when we finish. So this 4th study in question is actually quite recent. It's from 2020, and it was written by 3 different authors, Francesca Gino, Kuchaki, and Casciaro, and it was called Why Connect Moral Consequences of Networking with a Promotion or Prevention Focus. So this was a study looking at different mindsets, specifically the promotion versus prevention mindset, which is a very well-known concept in psychology. The idea is that if you're in a promotion mindset, you're someone who is thinking about things that you want to aspire to, things that you want to be in the future. Whereas if you're thinking of a prevention mindset, you're thinking about what are the things that you're trying to avoid happening in your future. So this study was looking at promotion versus prevention mindsets, specifically in the context of networking, and it was looking at whether being in one of these two different mindsets would affect your attitude towards a networking event. So this is how the study worked. So in the first stage of the experiment, participants were split into one of three groups: the promotion, prevention, or control group. In the promotion group, they were asked to do a writing task where they would write about some kind of hope or aspiration that they had. And the idea is that this would put you in a promotion mindset as you're focusing on your future and things that you aspire to be. Whereas if you were allocated to the prevention condition, then you were asked to write about a kind of duty or obligation that you had. Whereas the people in the control condition were asked to write about their usual evening activities, which is something which shouldn't put them in either a prevention or promotion mindset. So after this initial priming stage of the experiment where they're getting into the mindset, they were then asked to imagine themselves in a social networking event where they are sort of meeting with colleagues, getting to know different people, making professional connections, and so on. And then after they imagine themselves in this networking situation, they're then asked to rate on a scale of 1 to 7 how morally impure thinking about that situation makes them feel. Specifically, they were asked how dirty, tainted, inauthentic, ashamed, wrong, unnatural, or impure this made them feel, and the average of how they rated these 7 different words would then form their moral impurity score. Bear in mind, the way that this scale works is that if they put a 1, that means that they saw absolutely no problem with networking, they didn't feel dirty or inauthentic at all, whereas if they put a 7, that meant that they were maximally impure, like they found networking to be really gross, like really morally impure. And then after they had done these sort of numerical values of rating things 1 to 7, then they were asked to give sort of 4 or 5 different words saying how networking made them feel. So the hypothesis of this experiment is that people who were put in the promotion condition, so that's people who were primed to think about their future aspirations and desires, that these people would be more comfortable with networking compared to people in the prevention condition who would therefore feel more morally impure. And when we look at the results of their study, that's exactly what they found. As you can see, Gino and her colleagues were able to get an extremely low p-value, meaning that their results were statistically significant. And so the paper concluded that yes, people in the prevention condition feel more impure compared to people put in a promotion mindset. So where did the suspicions with this study begin? Well, right off the bat, if you just plot the data that's in their posted data set, it already looks a bit dodgy. Take a look at this graph. If you look at the control condition, you can see that there were a lot of 1s. So these are people saying that they don't find networking to be morally impure at all. And you would expect that. If people don't feel that there's anything wrong with networking, they don't feel morally impure about it at all, they're likely to just put 1s across the board and therefore end up with an average score of 1. But if you look at the prevention condition, there is suspiciously very few 1s in this condition, but there are a lot of 2s and 3s. And that seems really weird because this is an average score, and so in order to get a 2 or a 3 average, that means that in all likelihood they put 2s across the board or 3s across the board, which seems a bit unnatural because why would a lot of people be putting all 2s? Like, I feel a little bit impure, but not that much, but then have so few people putting all 1s. So it already looks a bit suspicious. It kind of looks like there were a lot of 1s before that later got changed to 2s and 3s. And similarly, if we look at the promotion condition, there are now a lot of 1s once again. Now this one on the surface looks a little less suspicious. It looks a lot more similar to the control condition, but nevertheless, it's weird that there are so many 1s. Is it the case that some higher numbers got later changed down to 1? Let's see. So with the number part of this study looking so suspicious, the guys at Data Colada decided to look at the words. You'll remember that in the method for this study, they not only had to give a number rating, but also had to write 4 or 5 words about how networking made them feel. But here's the thing. The original authors, Gino and her co-authors, don't care about the words, it seems. They didn't even mention it in the results section. They didn't do any analysis of it. But the guys at Data Colada, they do care about the words, and they wanted to see, do the words line up to the number ratings? So in order to gauge whether the words that were used to describe networking were positive or negative and whether that corresponded with the numbers that were given, Data Colada had to come up with some way of quantifying this. And so they really went above and beyond in order to verify their suspicions here, because what they did was hire 3 different online workers who were blind to the condition and blind to the hypothesis of the experiment to independently rate how positive or negative they felt the different words were. They were simply fed words one at a time and then had to rate them on a scale of 1 to 7 on how positive or negative they felt those words were. So then that gave Data Colada then a way of quantifying the positivity or negativity of these different words, which would then allow them to, in a more objective way, compare how the sentiment of these words compares to the numerical sentiment expressed by the supposed participants in the experiment. So when they did this analysis, they isolated the participant IDs that they thought were most suspicious. Those were typically the ones that ended up with an average score of 2 or 3, because that kind of data just looks artificial or suspicious. And so when they look at this suspicious looking data, they found that that data was more likely to have words that didn't correspond to the numerical value that they were given. This is comparing the people who got an average impurity score of 3 to the people who got an average impurity score of somewhere between 2 and 3. So the people who are putting an impurity score of 3, they're saying that they find networking to be more gross or like more morally impure than the people who are putting a score between 2 and 3. And so the words that they use to describe networking should therefore sound more impure or more negative towards networking compared to the people who ended up with a score between 2 and 3. However, if you look at the number of blue rows, you can see that the people with an average score of 3 in general wrote more positive things compared to the people who got a score between 2 and 3, which is backwards. And if you were to move on to the promotion condition, so remember, this is the one where people were thinking about things that they aspire to, and so the authors hypothesized that these would be the people who are more comfortable with networking and therefore should give lower moral impurity scores. Well, Data Colada suspected that some of these people had their scores changed from higher numbers to ones. And when you look at the words that they were using to describe networking, it does seem like that's the case. Remember, if they're getting an average moral impurity score of 1, the most likely scenario being that they put just ones across the board, then that means that they find networking completely morally fine. They're morally happy to do it. There's nothing impure or dirty about it. But yet, when you look at the words that they were using to describe how they feel about networking, that's not the picture you get. The ones highlighted in red show a very clear story. They're using words like gross, phony, scummy, dishonest, dirty, fake, cheap. And like they're literally using the word dirty, and yet they rate dirty as a 1, as in they're saying that I don't feel at all dirty. So if you look at the sentiment from these words, it seems like these people probably put a much higher impurity score, but they had their score later adjusted down to 1. So what happens if you just analyze the words and ignore the numerical score that the original authors focused on? So when Data Colada just analyzed the words based off the numerical value that they got from their 3 online people who were rating the different words, they found that not only does the effect disappear when you just analyze the words, but actually the effect is reversed, and that for some reason people in the prevention condition, so people who were thinking about like their duties and obligations, actually found networking to be more comfortable than people who were thinking about their hopes and aspirations if you just analyze the words. So I don't know whether this opposite hypothesis is actually true or not. I think, a replication study would be needed to verify that, but nevertheless, this seems like pretty strong evidence that this paper was faked. So what does Harvard's internal report have to say about this study? Well, according to what Data Colada wrote on their blog, apparently in Harvard's report you can find the original dataset for this study. And so when you compare the original dataset with the one that was posted online, you can see that a lot of different participants' values were changed between the original and the one that was posted. This table shows a summary of this. In the left-hand column you can see the participant ID, and then in all the other columns you can see how their scores were adjusted. If you look at the 1 second from the bottom, participant 538, you can see that all of their scores were decreased by 6. So was the manipulation exactly how Data Colada suspected? Well, they did a little bit of analysis and this is what they found. Yep, when we look at the original data for the prevention condition, so these were the people who were predicted to find networking to be more morally impure. 88 of the participants originally gave all 1, so just I don't feel impure at all across the board. But when we compare that to the dataset that was posted online, we can see that 58 of these people who originally put all 1s had their scores changed to all 2s, 18 of them had their scores changed to all 3s, and 12 of them were changed to even higher scores than that. And when you look at the participants in the promotion condition, so those are the people who were predicted to be more comfortable with networking, you can see that 16 of them had their data changed. All of them originally had very high ratings, meaning that they found networking to be really impure, and all 16 of them had their scores adjusted down to be really low. So what is Gino and her legal team's defense to these allegations? Well, Data Colada write in their blog post that Gino and her legal team's defense so far has been that the posted file actually contains the original data, and that the supposed original data found by Harvard is not the original data, but instead is data that was tampered with by some bad actor, third party who hacked into her account and changed the data. Well, how plausible is that argument? Well, in order for that to happen, this bad actor, she half accused Nina Mazar in her transcript, she'd have to access Gino's password-protected Qualtrics account, alter the data without ever being detected, deliberately change the data in a way so that it didn't support Gino's original hypothesis, and finally, and what to me is the real kicker that makes this argument pretty hard to defend, is that in order for this to be true, that would mean that the original data would have to be the nonsensical one, where the number scores and the words didn't match up, and that was supposed to be the original data, and that the altered data was changed in a way to make the words and the numbers make sense with each other, which just seems really implausible. Now, Data Colada do a lot more analysis on this, and they have a lot of cool plots where they demonstrate their point even more clearly, so if you want to check that out, I'll have a link to their blog post in the description. But yeah, what do you make of all this? To me, it seems like a pretty strong argument from Data Colada that Gino is guilty. I have no idea how Gino and her team are going to try to defend against this one, but it seems pretty definitive to me. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know. And please subscribe if you haven't already. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.